My name is Mick McCarthy, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. And on behalf of the STM, I have the privilege of welcoming everybody here on this rainy Saturday morning and to welcome you to the EVELYN Underhill Lecture in Christian Spirituality. I also have the pleasure of thanking those who have made this morning possible. Particularly Kara O'Sullivan and Marcia Ryan from the School of Theology and Ministry, as well as Sean Marrow back there from University Advancement. A word, though, on the lecture itself. The EVELYN Underhill Lecture in Christian Spirituality is an annual lecture initiated in 2001 by the Boston College Institute of Religious Education and Pastoral Ministry, IREPM. Since 2008, it has been continued by the School of Theology and Ministry, the STM, really for the past 15 years. The lecture is named for the early 20th century mystic, EVELYN Underhill, born in 1874, died in 1941. She was a married laywoman in ministry. She was the first woman invited to give a series of theological lectures at Oxford and the first woman invited to lead clergy retreats in the Anglican Church. Widely recognized for her classical text, Mysticism, a comprehensive study of religious experience, Underhill authored numerous works on the Christian spiritual life that have become classics. She wrote as an evangelist for reality and was convinced that a practical mysticism was not for the few, the proud, and the brave, but indeed within the reach of all. This year's Underhill lecture is also an evangelist for reality, one who knows well the value of rest in any practical mysticism that does justice. And here to introduce our 2023 Underhill lecturer is the STM's Faculty Director of Spirituality Studies, Dr. Colleen Griffith.
Good morning. You are the brave souls here today in this weather. Christine Firer Hinze is Professor of Theological and Social Ethics and Chair of the Department of Theology at Fordham University. Prior to joining Fordham's faculty in 2006, she taught high school and served in inner city ministry in Detroit, and later taught at St. Norbert College and Marquette University in Wisconsin. Christine's teaching and research focus on foundational and applied ethics, especially the dynamics of social transformation, Catholic social thought, and economic and work justice for vulnerable women, families, and communities. These long-standing concerns animate her two books, her two most recent works, Glass Ceilings and Dirt Floors, Women, Work, and the Global Economy, and Radical Sufficiency, Work, Livelihood, and a U.S. Catholic Economic Agenda. Concern for such issues further inspired her recently published 2022 presidential address to the Catholic Theological Society of America, which focused on a rest-inflected theology of work and action. Additional scholarly essays by Chris have appeared in the journals Theological Studies, Journal of the Society of Christian Ethics, the Journal of Catholic Social Thought, and Studies in Christian Ethics. Every bit as noteworthy as Chris's publications, however, is the esteem in which she is held as a teacher, as a mentor, as a colleague. Upon hearing that Chris was coming today, one of our own BC ethicists said, "What a great supporter of students and emerging theologians Chris always has been, especially women coming into the field." And a well-known senior colleague of Chris's from Fordham had this to say, and I quote, "Chris Hinze is an intensely caring human being She sees what persons need before they can even think of it. She operates with tremendous cura personalis as the chair of our department. And best of all, her ringing laugh can be heard all the way down the hall. Thus, this morning, we give a warm BC welcome to a remarkable scholar, teacher, and colleague, and a thoroughly good human being, who will be speaking to us about rest and its expanse in spirituality and justice work. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hinze.
Wow, who was that person? I guess I'll have to fill in. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Mick. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I'm humbled, I'm honored, I'm delighted, and I'm excited to be with you today. To speak on this topic that I am better at speaking at than doing, which may be true for some of you as well. So I also love that this is the EVELYN Underhill lecture, because I do believe that what we're talking about today has a lot to do with spirituality, even though many might not use the word for it. It's under her patronage. And I'm also thirdly very thrilled to be standing under this window of St. Patrick. My Chicago-born 100% Irish mother and her family are all looking down, very happy to see that I'm in the Irish room today. So that's another bonus. So as we move through our days today in the United States, April 1st, 2023, we are continually confronted with painful paradoxes. On the one hand, we, especially the we, privileged enough to be in this room today, enjoy so many blessings, blessings of life, blessings of love, beauty, and relative material abundance. On the other hand, we and our neighbors, both locally and around the world, and including people in this room, daily live surrounded by and grappling with huge complex problems. From personal problems to wider ones, poverty, inequality, racism, the climate crisis, by bitter conflicts from the personal to the familial to the political and the international, wars, and by our own personal and larger institutional failures, the cumulative effects of which on people, on us, bewilder us, hurt us, grieve us, and cause suffering. Amid all this, it seems kind of dumb to talk about rest. In a way, the question arises, isn't this sort of a trivial topic? There's so much to do. There's so much we need to do. And we're a room full of people who I would wager are hard workers and who may love their work and who like to work. So we want to keep that on the table as we spend all this time talking about rest. With all that work that so urgently needs to be done, it does seem like an odd thing to talk about. But today in this Jesuit university, whose motto is ever excelling, educating men and women for others, for the greater glory of God, I hope we can reflect together on a really basic but fundamental premise, and that's this. Our work and our activity, including our work and action devoted to building a more loving, just, and sustainable world, is going to fall short, and it is going to fail unless it is intentionally and caringly connected to well springs and rhythms of rest. Fundamental to survival and well-being, rest is a basic human right, the UN tells us. For Jews and Christians, it's more. It's a divine command on par with God's command to keep and till the earth, a gift and a key expression of our human nature as imago Dei. Our human capacity, duty, and privilege to work and to act in the world come with an equally fundamental capacity, duty, and privilege to rest for our own good, the common good, and the sake of what Christian scriptures and traditions speak of as the reign and the glory of God. From the point of view of Christian social ethics, which is my area, to value and practice good rest and to ensure and protect good rest for others are essential to the work of solidarity and the preferential option for the vulnerable, and for funding the resources we need to combat the real, powerful, anti-human and anti-ecological forces that threaten us today. To center rest is not to deny the value, importance, necessity of hard work. Again, I guess many of us in this room love and are dedicated to our work, and many of us love to work. And when we talk about work, we're also talking about not just paid work, but all the ways in which we labor in the world. A lot of my career has been spent talking about women and work, and the whole care economy, the whole realm of unpaid work that we do every day, not just women, but women and men. Christian scripture and tradition regard work under dignified and just conditions as a bonum honestum, as a way humans reflect the divine image, and as an integral part of the life that God has given us and created us for. However, in modern Catholic and social thought and Christian thought practice over the past century plus, especially perhaps in the United States, in the Western countries, attention to work has outrun attention to rest, to the detriment of the ways we understand and practice both. Good spirituality and practices of work and good spirituality and practices of rest are intertwined. And without the one, the other fails. So I want to start by proposing that we set our course for today's exploration of rest within three imaginative vectors. First, the ministry of Jesus in the Gospels, a man of action, yet also a proponent of rest apart, a faithful Sabbath-keeping Jew who also challenged legalistic prohibitions to healing and to doing good on the Sabbath, and a person who invited his followers to work with and to seek rest in him. And one of the sort of guiding texts for today is this text from Matthew. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. Oops. Here we see Jesus describe rest not as the cessation of our burdens and our labors, but rather as a gift given in the midst of them. His listeners in that agricultural setting would easily have pictured the wooden double yoke commonly used for working teams of oxen in the fields. In their scriptures, yoke could function as a symbol of servility or forced service. But those same scriptures also spoke of obedience to the covenant as taking on God's yoke. As these farming people also knew, with a well-crafted yoke and experience, two oxen with their human driver can become attuned to one another, enabling a collaboration in work that brings a certain companionship and ease, and that increases the power to accomplish it. Plowing is toilsome and exhausting labor for sure, no doubt, but a skilled driver, a properly fitted yoke, and the right partner can make the burden lighter. Second, I propose on this, we're on the cusp of Holy Week, right? The cusp of Holy Week, that today we imagine the way activity and rest figure into the narrative of Holy Week. From Palm Sunday to Holy Thursday, to Easter Sunday, to Good Friday, there's so much turmoil, right? It's incredibly dramatic. It's the most dramatic week of the year, right? The stories are so dramatic. Each one would stand on its own. We see so much action, drama. Where, if anywhere, might we also detect the presence or rhythms of rest or restfulness that I claim is essential to human and Christian living? So much, right? So one thing, just a sidebar, as I'm doing this research, it's starting to occur to me that it's really interesting wherever you see the word work to replace it with rest. So to say, I'm a hard worker, are you a hard rester? I do good work. Do you do good rest? I really care about my work. Do you care about your rest? And I actually think that that is the sort of one of the messages that I've come to for us to sort of ponder today. Third, I want to invite us to also imagine the narrative of the founder of the Society of Jesus, Ignatius, and the spiritual and educational vision that a place like BC is founded on and tries to promote. So Ignatius is the guy who got injured and had to sit in bed, and he found he had a conversion, right, of a certain sort. He gave up his sword for the cross. Many of us are familiar with the outlines of his story. One thing that comes across, at least in our American renderings of Ignatius, is that he's a man of action. He's not a man that sits still. Even when he sits at his desk, he writes 10,000 or whatever number of letters, during his administrative years. You can imagine him at a laptop, in today's world. But the statues on campus, so on the right is the statue at BC, and on the left is the statue at Fordham. Notice the movement. He's a man of movement, right? And so I think it's that sense of movement. Love is shown in deeds more than words. The Magis, men and women for others. We try to tell our students, and we ourselves just love this idea of sort of pouring yourself out for the glory of God. So a lot of action. And I think that's where this prayer comes from that I allude to in the beginning of in the title of the lecture. How many people learned this prayer if you were exposed to Jesuit spirituality in your life? Okay, so a good number. Yeah, a good number. Teach me to be generous, to give and not count the cost. I kept thinking of the Man of La Mancha too. To give and not. To fight and not heed the wounds. It's a real soldier's prayer, to toil and not ask for rest, to labor and not seek reward, except to know that I do your will. Now, I don't mean to make fun of this. I think there's something so inspiring about it, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It turns out that this prayer didn't come from him. It was written in the late 19th century. But at the same time, people grab onto it because it expresses an Ignatian sentiment, right? Together, these imaginative lines, Jesus's ministry, the text I gave you, Holy Week Jesus, and Ignatius, invite a lot of reflections. Here we're going to use them to help illuminate truths about rest. Rest's quiet invitation to encounter and to dwell in reality, la realidad, as our Latinx brothers and sisters call it, both amid and apart from the hubbub and striving of everyday life. Rest's varied forms and textures, its status as necessary and a right for people in creation, and its healing, holding, subversive, and transformative powers. So first, let's talk about what rest is anyway. Rest refers to moments, states, dimensions of experience, or periods of time free from effortful activity or goal-oriented striving. Rest connotes a pause, a relaxing, a letting go, receptivity, being rather than doing. Up here I have some description of what rest is that comes from the medical world, which focuses on your nervous system, resting your nervous system. So we're embodied beings, right? Though rest is very individual, we depend on our communities to provide the conditions, the support, and the safety we need in order to rest. If you've ever been in a place you don't feel safe, it's not easy to rest, whether that's a relationship or a workspace or public, right? So we depend on communities to do this for us because we're vulnerable when we rest. So we can't, and we don't, rest just anywhere or with anyone. Rest isn't work, but it's intertwined with all our other activities, including work. And there's even pieces of rest in the idle activity that we go through, like scrolling on our phones or surfing the internet. It has elements with the receptive, contemplative state of being that philosophers like Joseph Pieper call leisure, but it's not the same. It's something underneath all this, I think. Jesus's life, and perhaps also Ignatius's, point to two major ways we experience rest. Rest amid other activities and rest apart from other kinds of activities. So first, let's talk a little bit about rest amid. This is rest we may not consciously even notice, but that we experience and depend upon most basically in the embodied rhythms of our physical selves. The pauses between breaths, between heartbeats, between steps. Effort, rest, effort, rest. Whether we're sleeping or in the thick of strenuous physical activity, these kinds of physical rest amid it all are ever present. In a recent book, BC Theology alum Connor Kelly, which is a great book, discusses another kind of rest amid activity associated, and he draws this from positive psychology. Some of you may be familiar with this. Associated with feelings of happiness, which positive psychologists have named flow. Flow is a state of focus, easy efficacy, and engaged purpose. Flow provides a sense of restfulness even in the midst of energy expending activity. I think you could say that when we say we love our work, oftentimes it's because we're experiencing this feeling of flow when we get into the middle. She's really into it. You know, I was in the zone, you know, whether you're exercising or reading or, you know, whatever it is you're doing, this notion of and studies have been done around the world. Athletes, artists, surgeons, teachers, speakers, writers, skilled tradespeople, children playing. Across such a variety of people, all describe experiences of flow in similar ways, as feeling absorbed, present, and in the zone, while time, along with feelings of anxiety or even arduous striving, often seems to dissolve. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi at the University of Chicago has dedicated, I think he's up there, dedicated his life to studying this. That's life. So that's rest within. What about rest apart? The second basic kind of rest, which takes place apart from work and other utilitarian activities, is hearkened to in Genesis' image of God resting on the seventh day. What did God do that for? Well, nothing. God just did that. Rest takes part in times and places when one ceases striving and puts aside work-related activities. Sleep and physical relaxation are the most obvious examples of this kind of rest, but so is the rest of Sabbath in the Jewish tradition and Christian, or time set aside for meditation, immersing yourself in natural beauty, simple social gatherings, celebration, worship, and other forms of rest and refreshment that are apart from your everyday grind. Within these two broad categories, rest apart and rest within, physician Sandra Dalton Smith identifies a variety of types of rest that contribute to holistic human well-being. She stresses the importance of learning to recognize and attend to the particular kind of rest deficit you might be experiencing. Besides physical rest, she discusses 6 other kinds of rest. These include mental rest, taking a break from effortful thinking or shifting one's attention to less taxing, more enjoyable subjects. Sensory rest is taking one or more of our senses offline, so to speak, for short periods of time, resting your eyes, leaving a noisy place for a quiet one, unplugging from the lights and barrage of images on our computers and our phone screens are examples. Emotional rest, she says, is the cessation of emotional striving experienced when one no longer feels, quote, the need to perform or meet external expectations. Who makes you feel and what makes you feel emotionally rested? In emotional rest, I feel free and I can allow myself to experience and honor the full gamut of my feelings. I don't have to perform. I don't have to put on a mask, including the negative. Emotional rest doesn't preclude the experience of really painful or negative emotions. Rather, in emotional rest, I let my guard down, feel and acknowledge all the feelings, and be with the realities they disclose. This makes me think of the Psalms in the sense that Psalms express and help us sometimes to be in that state of emotional rest, even when we're lamenting, even when we're talking about pain. Creative rest is the rest we feel when we immerse ourselves in, she says, beauty, whether natural or humanly made. We can access this kind of rest by, for example, spending time, quote, near the ocean or the shore or in the forest, looking at beautiful art or listening to beautiful music or performances. Medical studies show that the nervous system gets the most calm in the presence of, what do you think it is? Water. Even better than the forest, water. Interesting, right? Social rest is finding comfort and solace in our relationships and social connections versus the restlessness of loneliness, isolation, and superficial conversations. Social rest, she explains, is about making space for those relationships that revive you and where you are acknowledged and valued. Social rest can be experienced in a variety of forms and places, from the intimate to the larger public spaces. Excuse me. For example, at a park, or at a coffee shop with other people. Finally, Dalton Smith speaks of spiritual or soul rest as finding sanctuary in a security and peace that comes from our relationship with the spiritual or the divine. We'll examine this kind of rest more as we go on. But first, we need to talk about the world we live in, which we might call the restlessness regime, the restlessness regime. The eclipse of rest in late capitalist consumerist society. We do not live in a rest-oriented culture. We live in an action-oriented culture. And again, as we said at the beginning, that's not all bad, right? A capitalist culture. And capitalism never rests. Consumerist capitalism, finance capitalism, surveillance capitalism, all of them run on an endless clock. Some little pictures here. For good or ill, their disembodied endlessness, the fact that we can, it's out there in the cloud now, right? Everything about work and everything we want to know and all that, it's all there. Disembodied endlessness has infiltrated all of our life worlds and seeped into all of us. Up through the mid-20th century, US labor movements fought against capitalism's always-on ethos, but fighting for humane working conditions and shorter weekly hours of work. But interestingly, in the decades since 1970, focusing on US here in particular, not less time at work, but higher salaries became the driving goal. Not coincidentally, this was the same period when real wages fell for the working class, necessitating more hours at work just to maintain the levels that people had had before, working and middle class. This shift is emblematic of the subtle power of US economic culture to draw us into the internal restlessness of what Bernard Herring, moral theologian, already was talking about in the 60s and worrying about, what he called the world of total work. This is a world where even if I'm, oh, aren't you nice? Thank you. He says, it's the world of the men without a Sabbath, men who, despite shorter hours and better working conditions, have become men without rest. That's Herring in the 1960s. 3 decades later, Juliet Shore's overworked American described an entrenched economic culture where people's time and energies had become ever more captured by and habituated into a habituated, if not addictive, squirrel cage of the work, spend, consume cycle. I want to say on the side that there's a lot of discussion about intergenerational differences on all this. So there are headlines that will say, you know, Gen Z wants work-life balance and doesn't want the rat race, right? That younger people, millennials, refuse to get on the, you know, to be in the squirrel cage. I hope that's true. My argument is, or what I'm saying here, it's really hard not to do it. It's really, really hard not to do it because it's a systemic thing. It isn't just an individual choice thing. Certainly, modern economic systems, and we should emphasize this, innovation and productivity have done wonderful things, made possible survival, health, and better lives for millions of people. But as social theorists like Erlich Beck and others have pointed out, the abstract 24/7 worlds of finance and mass production, consumer capitalism, they're not synced to the embodied realities, rhythms, and needs of flesh and blood, actual human beings or their communities. And the extent to which we become servants to and reshaped in the image of market systems' inherent restlessness, our humanity is degraded and threatened. Colonizing our time, encouraging addictive and unhealthy and unsatisfying patterns of working and filling our non-work time. The work, spend, consume culture breeds and sustains a world of total work and total restlessness. Linking this restless life to the vice of acedia, which has been translated as sloth, the deadly sin of sloth. But actually, more precisely means an unrestful state of languid disinterest. Hence the carving on the slide. Andrew Blosser, in a great new book from Orbis called "The Ethics of Doing Nothing." Oh, you're stealing my project, but it's a great book. He evokes Joseph Pieper, who suggests that behind our restless, busy work, there's often an effort to avoid exercising our powers for receptive knowing, what Thomas called intellectus. To avoid reality or really seeing la realidad, or letting it touch or challenge us. Now, this is kind of understandable when you're thinking climate crisis. Like I can't always think about the climate crisis, right? Sometimes I have to just not think about that stuff, right? So again, this isn't not about moments, but about lifestyles or patterns or habits. For Pieper and Blosser, acedia is also a failure to truly perceive the world, and it often results in a desperate search for stimulating environments that suppress receptive knowing. And so I have up here scrolling on the phone, on the one hand, like vegging out, kind of just mindlessly looking at the phone. On the other hand, work. Those are both ways we can avoid that, right? Without interweaving genuine rest into our lives, we get stuck in various permutations then of the life of homo faber, workman. Even if that work is responding to text or emails at all hours of the day or night, or mindlessly scrolling through TikTok or Insta or whatever our screen tells us we spent 4 hours on the screen for that day. Maintaining this state of affairs is actually very profitable for the people who really profit off it. But for most of us, in fact, everybody, it's harmful, particularly for the majority who are burdened with particularly for the majority of us who are burdened by the various combinations of what research track as time poverty, people who don't have enough time because they have to work as much as they do to pay the rent. They're holding down 2 jobs and so forth, and resource poverty. We might be working too hard at Boston College and Fordham, and we might feel like we have time poverty, but we don't have resource poverty. People who do not have money have both, and they're dealing with it all the time, and that's very, very harmful. Those who question or flout or simply can't keep up with this regime are likely to pay consequences. It's not easy to even step off just a little bit because peer pressure and cultural pressure is really, really hard, not to mention necessity. As social beings, we're so attuned to, what others think, etc. I mentioned when I spoke at the CTSA, someone in my office, I asked her, "What did you do this weekend?" And she said, "I rested." And it took me aback. I thought, I would never say that. I would never admit that I actually rested on the weekend. I found that like really countercultural, you know? And so it just shows how inured we are, you know, to this like, what is a good thing to say you did on the weekend? Well, I vegged out for a while and then I did this and this and this and this and this and, you know, et cetera. So this is where the wisdom and practices of religious traditions can serve as important resources. Now I want to talk about spiritual rest and Sabbath rest in Judaism and Christianity. These are the two commandments in the Hebrew scriptures about Sabbath. Historically and today, spiritual and religious traditions offer visions and practices of work and rest that can and do resist and challenge and offer alternatives to the restless and dehumanizing worlds of total work that have been historically inflicted on people, not just today, but in different ways, whether it be Israel in ancient Egypt, a world of total work. At least that's what they wanted from them, right? Upon enslaved African Americans in this country, and upon people in concentration work camps and gulags of the 20th century, or in the factories right now of the global supply chain. For both Jews and Christians, Sabbath rest and worship follow God's example and command. In observing Sabbath, God's people celebrate and participate in God's crowning creation. What's the last thing God created? We usually say humans, right? But no, rest. The rest for the Jewish tradition, menuha, M-E-N-U-H-A, understood as tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose of the seventh day. They also remember God's redemptive and liberative action in their histories and lives. On Sabbath, Jews also are also to extend that liberative rest and freedom to their neighbors, to strangers, you see here also to animals, and to the natural world. Jewish scholar Eitan Fishbane centers this rest apart and describes Shabbat as a weekly recollection of shalom, the wholeness and redemption of the world, peace. In that space of peace created by Sabbath, he says, quote, we intuit the interconnected unity of God, nature, and person. And though the pain of poverty and the scourge of injustice do not disappear with the lighting of the Sabbath candles, he continues, Shabbat does open up a vision of a world redeemed. We taste the dream of an earth blessed with perfection, an ideal that we can work toward again with renewed strength in the week to come. The wholeness and illumination of Shabbat call us to raise up the brokenness of this world and all who are driven low by its pain. So not escapism, but something different. Writer Donna Shaper, on the other hand, envisages Sabbath as also rest amid. For Shaper, the sense of Sabbath resides in every moment that actively includes the presence of God or Spirit. In our everyday lives, this Sabbath sense is accessible, especially through, she suggests, and this comes up a lot, through rituals that have the potential of unifying our fragmented days and times. Rituals keep time from becoming all of the same anxious pace and peace. We ritualize time so that it can become expansive. So this can be very homely, right, and common. Amid daily and weekly activities, these rituals, which may be as simple as and mundane as the practice of gathering for a family meal, or the habit among traditional Jewish women of hanging out their wash on Monday mornings so they all saw each other, can provide enriching and reliable moments for grounding community and restfulness. For millennial, Jewish Sabbath-keeping rituals have born a wisdom that Harvard Business School researchers have now rediscovered, but they're rediscovering for today's workplace. And here's the wisdom. People live better and they even work better when their jobs include regular, predictable, and required times away from work. Regular, predictable, and required. When we have this sort of, riffing kind of way we live our lives, like maybe I'll take time off now, maybe I won't. Even in the tech world, pick your vacation when you want to, take your days when you want, all that freedom. That's the opposite of ritual, right? That's the opposite of regular, predictable, and required. We in our department of theology have instituted over the last few years an email Sabbath that goes from Friday night at sundown till Sunday night at sundown. And the rule is you don't write emails about work to each other or respond to any emails about work during the weekend. What's great about it is, because it's regular, predictable, and required, it actually works. There's emergencies and so forth and so on. But so how do we do this in our lives when we're so encouraged? Because ritual seems like the opposite of freedom. Habit seems like the opposite of freedom. Observing this predictable, required time of stopping takes preparation, for sure. It takes advanced labor and it takes discipline. Shabbat doesn't just happen. There's a lot of running around and work that happens before the candles get lit. For observant Jews, Shabbat keeping also requires the willingness to be countercultural. I'm sure this is true for your Jewish colleagues, some of whom might be here, at BC. You're countercultural because you're just offline, for Shabbat. Shabbat and other religious festivals sustain and celebrate Jewish communal identity, but they also resist and challenge and place boundaries around today's 24/7 on treatment of time. I'm going to put in, this is sort of a random slide, and I just want to, because it's such a, for me, it's a very powerful image for kind of the whole thing we're talking about here. And that's this slide here. There's a way in which our world encourages us to live in a clenched fashion. Be in control, keep it together, keep going, gut it out, power through, et cetera, et cetera. What EVELYN Underhill, what the Christian and Jewish tradition are pointing to is that is not what being human is. It's at least certainly not completely. Underlying that and deeper than that is receptivity, not just action, openness. And notice there's a risk in opening up. There's something very protective about this, right? And there's something very vulnerable at this. Witness Good Friday. When you open heart, open hand, and so forth, you are vulnerable, right? This is less vulnerable. So that's just an image that for me is very powerful. I just wanted to throw it in there. And underlying that, so another way of putting that underlying thing is, for me, the 23rd Psalm is incredibly important in thinking this through, even in economics. To say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. If you look at that through the eyes of what people need to feel secure and to thrive, 23rd Psalm can be read on many levels. And I think it's an articulation of the open hands that we aspire to, but it's also a gift to be able to rest in that confidence, right? It's not something you can just force yourself to do. You have to allow your fingers to become unclenched, so that you can receive that gift. And then Holy Week. So Holy Week, again, back to the drama of Holy Week. So Jesus goes through Holy Week, and we know that one of his last words on the cross is my God, why have you forsaken me? Which I was quite old before I realized that was the first line of Psalm 22. So rather than simply saying, I'm despairing, it is the beginning of a prayer that then goes on to say, as Psalms often do, why have you done this to me? Why have you let me alone? You don't hear me, but I know you are there. I know you will take care of us. I know Israel has hoped in you. The back and forth of this is horrible, and I can't believe you're doing this, and yet I know you are God. And the other thing I realized most recently, and I have no idea, there might be a scripture scholar in the room who can tell us this. So what comes right after Psalm 22? Psalm 23. Does that make any difference? Did Jesus learn the Psalms? Was there an order in the Psalms as he learned them? Because there's a segue there that goes into this really deep piece that God is going to take care of me. So not looking at Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which he said in his own childhood language, which makes it so poignant, right? He was speaking almost as a child. I'm getting a chill. He was speaking as a child, like, why have you done this to me? To see it in a broader context of someone who knew the Psalms, and prayed the Psalms. And then you see in some of the synoptics, into your hands I commend my spirit. It comes out of that. Okay. Christians too are enjoined to keep the Sabbath. And at the same time, however, so Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, right? Became this for at least in the United States, for the majority of U.S. Christians today, this commandment seems to have dropped off the Decalogue tablets. For U.S. Catholics in the last century, a sometimes vocationally inspired ethic of hard work and also a desire to make it and to fit in, let's be honest, has really kept us sort of congruent with the U.S. Work hard to succeed ethos, right? The American dream, we work hard. Fordham and Boston College are both, created for immigrants who want to have an education so they can have a job and so forth. This go, do thing. Catholics have gotten right on board with that. Some people even talk about a Catholic work ethic, right? Because we also infuse vocation into that, Plus, it's my calling, right? So when do I stop? Well, when? Pushing against this, there are Christian theologians who are really promoting for Christians Sabbath rest, taking Sabbath rest as a humanizing spiritual practice. One of the things David Jensen writes is that taking Sabbath time frees us from false dependence on our own work. We can rest and say, we've worked enough in the end, because God is already at work for us. Norman Witzka highlights delight and nurturing relationships as the purpose or what you do when you're practicing Sabbath. Andrew Blosser talks about, what does God do? We imitate God when we rest. And what does God do on the seventh day? To be present, to rest in the presence of God's creation. To rest in the presence of God's creation, including your family members, and the people who irritate you, and the beautiful world and the ugly world. He links this to Genesis 1:2, where Yahweh finishes and culminates creation by creating the Sabbath on the seventh day and delighting in all that has been made. By keeping Sabbath, we image God again by resting in the presence of God's creation. So this points us back to Dalton Smith, the physician's last form of rest, spiritual or soul rest. Soul rest, she says, replaces striving when our identity is secure. Christian writer Glynis Whitwer agrees. Spiritual rest is a deep sense of confidence and trust, resting in God. Soul rest is rooted in faith and confidence that we are deeply and unconditionally loved and held safe. Psalm 23. We rest when even in the face of fears and insecurities, we fully trust we are safe in the hands of God. Again, as we said earlier. As a range of spiritual traditions attest, how are we doing here? In times of and postures of rest, the fertile processes of insight, understanding, and wisdom have space to germinate and grow. Rest as resistance, healing, and empowerment. Does everybody know about this person? Patricia Hersey? Yeah. Prioritizing rest amid and rest apart from work is also a way of practicing resistance to anti-human, anti-God forces afoot in our world. When we rest and foster restfulness around us, we engage in an ancient and powerful human strategy for surviving, opposing, and strengthening our capacities to subvert these necrophilic forces that threaten to undermine us. This insight is at the center of the work of Atlanta-based artist, activist, and womanist theologian Tricia Hersey. Hersey, a graduate of Emory's Candler School of Theology, uses Black, Afrofuturist, womanist, and theological sources to create what she calls the Rest is Resistance movement. Her manifesto, the Rest Manifesto, centers on 4 tenets. First, rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Second, our bodies are a site of liberation. Third, naps, and she's into rest and naps. Naps, rest, and sleep provide a healing portal to imagine, invent, and heal. Hersey speaks of sleep and daydreaming as creating a third space, which has intriguing resonance to the physical third spaces being promoted among some urban planners today, where healing spiritual connections with ourselves, with our ancestors. We believe in the communion of saints. With our ancestors and communities, resonant of the spiritual bonds, again, of the communion of saints, can take place, and new utopic alternative imaginations can gestate and be birthed. We can't be creative if we don't rest. We can't, our energies of imagination can't be fostered if we don't rest. To me, this gives such an interesting angle on the liberal arts too. Like, why do we study the liberal arts? Why do we read literature? Why do we, think about languages and cultures? Part of it is so that we can exercise that receptive knowing that opens us up to imagination and something different. Hence her final tenet, and here she's explicit about her movement's concern to honor and make reparations for the rest and space to dream stolen from African American ancestors, is this: our dream space has been stolen and we want it back. We will reclaim it through rest, unquote. Hersey cites the work of our colleague Sean Copeland and asks, how do we care for our own bodies as sacred? How do we cooperate to craft a world in which all bodies can thrive? For Hersey, this requires what Bell Hooks calls a meticulous love practice, grounded in community care versus individual commodified self-care. The whole self-care industry is big right now, right? And rest. Exhaustion, she concludes, will not save us. Oh, I had another slide. Here we go. There's somebody resting. And there's another. Exhaustion will not save us. To imagine a new world that centers liberation, rest must be our foundation. To invent, restore, imagine, and build, exhaustion will not save us. Interestingly, one of the things she works on is the history of the African-American Maroons, which I had never heard of before, but are historically groups of African-American slaves who escaped or just simply opted out, found a way to move away from the slave system and built their own worlds of their own communities of rest and of just relations and of loving community on the edges of the slave system. So it's also about finding spaces in the midst of or on the edges of the system, that the hegemonic status quo. Hersey focuses on the many powers of rest apart, including rest's power to undermine grind and hustle culture, or at least speak against it, and to nurture and replenish the energies vital to work for economic, racial, and social justice. Could somebody give me a time check? Does anyone know how long I've been talking? Forever. All right, we'll keep going. Yeah, don't waste time. Don't waste time. Okay. No rest yet. Okay. She points to interestingly, she points to something very active, popular social movements, as one key locus for this work. In other words, this work of being restful, but also being very active in working for a better community and more justice. In these movements, the experiences and determination of people at the grassroots witness as well to the transformative power of rest amid struggles for a better world. This helped me understand why the community coalition that I'm part of in the Bronx is so big on having like get-togethers and dinners and hangouts and so forth. It seems like a waste of time from a sort of Puritan work ethic, but it's actually the kind of thing that allows you to sustain, and dancing and singing. Prodded by a holy restlessness for justice and peace and immersed in the mess and difficulties of efforts to attain them, because it's very frustrating work if you do it, Hersey invites change seekers to find fortitude and strength in communal and spiritually grounded rest, apart as well as amid their struggles. One beautiful example, historical example of this, is recounted by Martin Luther King Jr. And it concerns a woman by the name of Mother Pollard, one of the elders of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, during the bus boycott of 1955 and 6. This elderly, quote, poor and uneducated Black woman deeply impressed the 26-year-old King, 26 years old, as, quote, amazingly intelligent and understanding of the meaning of this movement. And she became a valuable source of love and inspiration for King. Though in her 70s, Mother Pollard walked in the boycott, she refused to take the bus and was adamant that she would continue to walk to see change happen, explaining at one point to Dr. King when he said, you know, you could take a ride, you know, someone could give you a ride. She said, my feet are tired, but my soul is rested, unquote. Okay, I want to talk just about two other kinds of powers of rest in useless, intrinsically valuable celebratory leisure and ritual and humor. Blosser in The Ethics of Doing Nothing notes that along with religious rituals practiced by millions, celebratory leisure, communal moments of being and celebrating for its own sake, take place in constant big and little ways every day. He gives an example of walking across campus and seeing a bunch of students make a snowman. And he says, what are they doing that for? Not to make the snowman. They're doing that just to be the joy of nature and doing something together and having a good time and doing something that isn't productive, really, right? And he says this goes on all the time, a non-instrumental celebration. Here at Boston College, our colleague Roberto Goizueta has also witnessed to this truth about the powers that seemingly useless celebrations and rituals, whether religious or not, the power that these have among Latinate peoples and how much it can nurture and unleash power. This is quintessentially described in Goizueta's analysis of Latinate celebratory practices of fiesta. For him, a fiesta is useless, but also potentially socially transformative. How? It's not merely an individually focused party. He says fiesta is not a party or partying. It's a serious, culturally thick practice of both play and work whose quintessence is creating and drawing together a community who participate in fiesta to experience life as gift. When Latinate communities celebrate fiesta in the face of adversity, quote, we are receiving and responding to the gift of life, not sentimentally, but in an ontological, deeper sense. While a value in itself, fiesta and ritual, this is the seedbed of seedbed of ethical political action, the affirmation of personhood and peoplehood. Further, these times of celebration, and I have some religious ones on there too, Holy Week, as a matter of fact. Let's see, are moments, he says, of living in the subjunctive. Some of you know this famous essay by him, living as if mentality. This mindset isn't a matter of faking happiness or sentimentality, but rather the fiesta declares, quote, that the daily challenges and miseries of life will not have the last word, but rather the maintenance of our people's identity and beloved by God will. So useless rituals and celebrations. Another useless thing we do that is actually very useful is humor. Working in a similar way to fiesta by generating rest, usually rest amid, that heals, resists, and empowers is humor and its attendant laughter. In a memoir of her mother's last days, Angela O'Donnell reflects on humor and the comic as sacramental connectors to transcendence. Laughter is a peculiar embodied personal response. Think about just the experience of laughing. It's a pause that takes us out of the moment while also grounding us in reality, hence humus, earth, humor, yes, and humanity. O'Donnell recounts moments of redeeming laughter as she sat by her mother's deathbed, and she'd had a very difficult relationship with her mother as well, which on a deeper level mediate eschatological hope. Humor, she says, allows us to suspend the rules of the ordinary world, if only temporarily, since it takes us out of ourselves and our current situation and enables us to glimpse a consoling vision that delights. Next time you're laughing, honestly laughing, not cynically laughing, it's an interesting thing to think. It's a transcendent moment. It's a moment it's a vision that delights, a world beyond our current troubles that is not yet, but is promised. Blessed are you who weep, for you shall laugh. We laugh at a lot of things, the incongruities, the surprising, things where we're learning and recognizing something. Members of subordinated groups laugh and bond in the face of folly of their supposed superiors. And in sharing humor and laughter, even amid the stress and sadness of her mother's imminent death, O'Donnell and her sisters discovered embodied and inspirited moments of common enjoyment and rest. In this vein, theologian Anita Houck also brings in the idea of retrieving the Aristotelian and Thomistic virtue of eutrapelia. Eutrapelia, there's another Latin word for us, the virtue of playfulness and good humor. Who are the colleagues we really appreciate? It's probably not the ones who come in every day, oh my God, I'm so busy, I'm really tired, I can't stand it. And then this happened, and then that happened. As chair, I often have to erase a lot of lines on emails like, well, then this happened, and just forget it. Like, they don't want to hear what happened and what happened, Good humor and playfulness. I could point out people in the room right now who give us that every day, and I appreciate it. When practiced well, eutrapelia can encourage social bonds, bolster other virtues, refresh imaginations, and amid the ups and downs of life, witness to and purvey soul rest. Okay, last part. The gifts and powers of a rest-grounded spirituality of work and justice seeking. Whether inside our labors or outside of them, rest bears a host of life-enhancing powers and gifts. First, rest reconnects our embodied and inspirited selves, reconnects us to others, to the earth, and to God. Second, by motivating us to stop and step back from our absorption in the mundane and the status quo, resting creates sites and moments of freedom. It gives us freedom, times and spaces where reality in its beauty and its ugliness can be received, contemplated, and honestly faced. This includes the often painful but healing power to face, take a long, loving look at, and to come to terms with our own reality, with its beauty and ugliness. Third, as Hersey attests, rest bestows the gifts of the space and time to imagine and to dream, capacities that are critically necessary for shaking off the torpor of the way things are, the weight of it, and for envisioning, inventing, and enacting creative responses to the many deep crises of our time. Fourth, because to rest requires community care, it nurtures our receptive power to be vulnerable. And it also nurtures the power to accept our vulnerability. And it also nurtures the power to accept and to suffer, the power to suffer when suffering and enduring are justly called for or they're inevitable. Because we realize we are loved and we are not alone. Finally, by renewing and sustaining our energies for love, work, and action for the common good, and practicing rest amid and rest apart grants us the power to, I can't read my writing, to engage and persist in the long haul labors needed to survive and transform unjust and oppressive ideologies, institutions, and systems. The hard work of changing race, climate, violence, etc. It gives us the power to continue. In speaking about the manifold gifts of power of rest. We can't be naive. Just like work, rest can be corrupted, right? It can be selfish. It can be commodified. There's all the bad things that can happen to it. This is why we need models and we need communities to help hold us to rest, to help us be accountable to rest, like our little email Sabbath group down at Fordham, and can help us and people who then can guide us. Lastly, here are two prayers of St. Francis, St. Ignatius, the prayer for generosity, but also the sushi pace, take, Lord, receive. Okay, there's another prayer, okay, and that's much more of that kind of prayer, right? Take, Lord, receive. As beautiful as these are, we also have to be attentive to the possible dangers of certain interpretations of the Ignatian call to Magus, to go set the world on fire, to seek the path of self-giving generosity. Our salutary, vocationally focused commitments, because we care about our work, as someone here has said, to the good work that needs doing, are vulnerable, maybe uniquely vulnerable, to being co-opted into driving our own version of a world of total work. The restlessness regime we need to challenge is also ingrained in our own psyches, even with all our good intentions. In face of the potential endlessness of all the good work to be done and the enormity of the world's problems, how do we practice and advocate for good rest in the midst of it all? In each person's life, there will be times where there will arise what Whitworth calls necessary seasons of overcommitment. Oh, good, there's a loophole. There are times when we just have to work extra. When you have young kids and you're working full time, et cetera, you're going to be overcommitted. You know, there's seasons of overcommitment. But when busyness, overcommitment, and lack of Sabbath time become job descriptions or a way of life, we risk being transmogrified from human beings who were not created to never stop, to dehumanized images of the very system of total work and restlessness that it's our mission as Christians and as citizens to resist. So, to move in this direction, we need to get as serious about rest as we are about work. We need to acknowledge that practicing rest, taking up the task of ensuring rest for all, are critical to the survival and vitality of every person, including ourselves, and every single sphere of human relationship and activity, especially maybe those, the work of justice and the work of doing good. In seeking conversion to a better vision and practice of work for justice, we need to look and learn from people and communities who do prioritize, engage in life-giving patterns of rest and work. And often these are the non-elites. These are the people who haven't made it. And so they are actually more able to teach us. And we need to develop the persistent, subversive, and potentially transformative practice of foregrounding rest in its many humanizing facets, for our good, for the common good, for the good of the earth, and AMDG. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Joe Cavadas. I'm a veteran for peace. And this has been a great lecture. I really enjoyed it. Now we have to look back at the little bit of history of rest. All right. France has been out in the street rioting because they raised this retirement age from 62 to 64. We had the same thing happened in the United States in 1986, but nothing, there was no riots here. If we're in Europe today, we would have 4 to 6 weeks vacation to start off.
Yes.
You'd have public transportation, which is very well run. You'd have pretty much free daycare, and the students wouldn't be leaving college with a big loan.
You're absolutely right. Europe has actually done a lot better than we have on that. And then that makes us say, so what is it about Americans? Like, what is it about our American thing, you know, that has allowed us to not only, for example, when the age for retirement was raised, nobody thought anything of it. Oh, good. I'm a baby boomer. I'm going to be young forever. So therefore, I don't mind. I like to work, right? This goes to the intergenerational issue as well. But I totally agree with you. There are places we can look to.
All right, I have another question, another comment. The T is running now on a Sabbath schedule, the Saturday schedule. And they're thinking of putting dining cars on the subways because they go so slow. All right. And now, this is the Prozac moment. All right. 20 years, they claimed that they weren't any repairs, few repairs in the past 20 years. Now, what has the United States done in the past 20 years? $8 trillion in a war in the Middle East, $125 billion to Ukraine for war. So we have daycare that's to the roof. Students are paying through. I went to college in the 60s, $100 a semester. And it's just unbelievable to think that no one has said a word about this for 20 years. I've been out in the street for 20 years protesting because I went to Vietnam and I saw it firsthand. And I think of the Berringham brothers. I think of Father Drinan and the Catholic priests, the route for peace. And there's so few people out for peace today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your work for peace and for your service. You're laid out in such a short, clear way, you know, the way, the milieu in which we sit and think about this issue of rest and work for justice today. And to me, it just underlines how much work there is to do, and I think this notion of stepping back to even notice how immersed we are and how we don't even question why there's no paid childcare, you know, how we don't even question why my good friend who's here, you know, had to go back to work after 6 weeks after her first child was born because that was the only way they could afford to have a house or have a place to live, that we just accept and live in this system that, again, I haven't spoken about women here, but, you know, they're often bearing the brunt of this. And then men are bearing it, you know, in the war system, in the war machine. So the priorities are so out of whack. That's why it seems important to talk about the rest within the work, but also finding the spaces where something different it can be actually lived and experienced during our short lifetimes, right? I grew up in the 60s and 70s too, and we thought we were going to fix the world by the time I was my age, right? But the Christian worldview says that's a folly, right? Sin and finitude are going to be there. And so how in our lifetime, our short lifetime, do we both put our shoulders to the grindstone to move it forward, but also create these spaces where what should be is experienced even in the midst of the mess. So thank you.
Thanks. Another question, we'd ask you to keep it to one so we hear lots of voices.
Hi there, I'm Emily. I'm coming from the University of Dallas. I was really struck by the idea that when we rest, we are in the presence of creation in the same way that God was on his day of rest on the seventh day. But at the same time, I'm kind of concerned about those similarities because I'm thinking if rest brings us healing, restoration, all these amazing effects, if we think of God resting, there might be an implication that perhaps there's imperfections in God because he doesn't need to heal, be restored, be empowered. So my question to you is, how can we think about similarities between a human person's rest and God's rest? Thank you.
Wow, that's a big theological question. But I'm thinking about being made in the image of God, right? Humans, for Christians and Jews, are made in the image of God. And so we say, well, I'm made in the image of God, so I love, you know, as God loves. God loves, I love. God creates, I create. But let's face it, our version of that is very puny compared to God's, right? But it's almost a paradox, as you said, to think about God as resting. And you say he doesn't need God, God doesn't need to rest or to be replenished. And God does rest, though. And God blesses the seventh day and blesses the rest. It's the first thing God blesses in Genesis. And so if I am in the image of God and I am being commanded really to reflect this in my Sabbath rest, so interesting too that those commands don't say, go to the synagogue, say these prayers, make sure you, et cetera. It's rest. It's amazing. Yes, it's going to be puny, but it's real. And I just think it's shocking to me in my lifetime how talking about rest or talking about Sunday rest even, has just fallen off the map. I know that wasn't your question, but yeah. So I think it's God's rest is different than our rest. God's rest is what we will enter into, if you want to call the word heaven, right? The beatific vision, the eternal rest. And that's why, it says rest in peace on gravestones. It doesn't say work in peace, or they worked hard or whatever it might be. And so part of this as I'm writing it at my age is like, God, I'm going to rest soon enough, like, don't I need to work even harder? But the wisdom of saying, no, at least once every week, I need to stop. And in the midst of my day, remember the examen of consciousness for Ignatius, you're stopping, you're opening your intellectus, your receptive knowing, and say, what happened today? Where was God today? Like creating that habit that then allows me to see, well, wait a minute, it's wrong that there isn't any childcare subsidies, because people need some time. Anyway. So that's a rambling attempt at answering your question.
Thank you so much. A last question, Tom.
Thank you, Christine. Just a wonderful presentation. I was going to go home this afternoon and do my papers, but to heck with them. I'm not going to do it.
Bravo.
I'm not going to do it. Yeah, wait till Monday. They'll have to wait till Monday. I loved your imagery early on in your presentation about the yoke. And Gustavo Gutierrez, in a very famous sermon here at Boston College many years ago during our summer institute, talked about it very similarly as you have, that the yoke in the world of the time was a dual. There was always a pair. It was never a single yoke. It was always a pair. So when Jesus says to us, take my yoke upon you, he's really saying, I will pull one side and you have to pull the other. That Jesus walks with us in this yoke. And it's a double all the time.
Yeah.
So, but thank you. It was just wonderful presentation.
Thank you.